I'm Teresa Carraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. Today my topic is Talmud tricks and Torah curses, Jewish scriptures of superiority. And I'll be reading this so you can either listen or you can follow along and read it at thirdparadigm.substack.com, where I'm sure the comments will be interesting. Let's get started. I'll begin by quoting Chris Hedges from Israel's Culture of Deceit. He writes, Israel was founded on lies. The lie that Palestinian land was largely unoccupied. The lie that 750,000 Palestinians fled their homes and villages during their ethnic cleansing by Zionist militias in 1948 because they were told to by Arab leaders. The lie that it was Arab armies that started the 1948 war that saw Israel seize 78% of historic Palestine. The lie that Israel faced annihilation in 1967, forcing it to invade and occupy the remaining 22% of Palestine, as well as land belonging to Egypt and Syria. Israel is sustained by lies. The lie that Israel wants a just and equitable peace and will support a Palestinian state. The lie that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. The lie that Israel is an outpost of Western civilization in a sea of barbarism. The lie that Israel respects the rule of law and human rights. Israel's atrocities against the Palestinians are always greeted with lies. I heard them, I recorded them, I published them in my stories for the New York Times when I was the paper's Middle East bureau chief. I covered war for 2 decades, including 7 years in the Middle East. I learned quite a bit about the size and lethality of explosive devices. There is nothing in the arsenal of Hamas or Islamic Jihad that could have replicated the massive explosive power of the missile that killed an estimated 500 civilians in the Al-Ali Arab Christian Hospital in Gaza. Nothing. If Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad had these kinds of missiles, huge buildings in Israel would be rubble with hundreds of dead. They don't. Jeff, who had quoted this in my comment thread, wondered why Chris Hedges could see that so clearly, but took the Jewish account of World Wars I and II as gospel truth. I would go further and ask why he takes the Gospels as gospel truth, and I would question that starting with their origin. Another excellent reference from Jeff is the Unz review of Alison Weir's book, Against Our Better Judgment, on the tricks used to establish Israel and displace Palestinians with Jews, going back before World War I. But to understand Israel's culture of deceit requires going back to the origin of Rabbinical Judaism and what the alternative was. As a hint, it wasn't Christianity. In Judea, in the year 0 on which our dating system turns, there were 2 religions. In one, some were given the right to rule over others, and their followers were Hellenic Jews. They spoke Greek as all civilized people did. They stored their wealth in the Temple of Jerusalem in private chambers, and they answered to the Roman Empire and to Caesar, who was considered God, as is inscribed throughout Rome on archaeological ruins. The other religion was called the Fourth Philosophy, or Zealots, and it taught that all people are sovereign and have a right to rule themselves. Its founders were Judas, also called the Nazarene, the Galilean, the Healer, or the Sicariot, and Zadok, or Sadduq, the Pharisee, whose followers were the Sadducees. In their rebellion against Rome, their students rappelled up the temple in broad daylight and hacked off the golden eagle that signified Roman obedience. They were fearless and seemed impervious to pain, even under torture. For 3 years the Zealots won and kicked out Rome, occupying the temple and executing the high priest and the traitors to the rebellion. Titus, son of the Roman general Vespasian, who was then Caesar, put Jerusalem under siege in 70 CE. Josephus, the former Galilean general who had surrendered to Vespasian in 3 days and then said Vespasian was the prophesied Messiah, was sent to negotiate. Another traitor to the revolution was Yochanan ben Zakkai. Wikipedia writes, the Talmud reports that in the mid-1st century he was particularly active in opposing the Sadducees' interpretation of Jewish law and produced counter-arguments to the Sadducees' objection to the Pharisees. So dedicated was he to opposing the Sadducee view of Jewish law that he prevented the Jewish high priest, who was a Sadducee, from following the Sadducee interpretation of the red heifer ritual. His home at that time was in Arav in the Galilee, where he spent 18 years. However, although living among them, he found the attitude of Galileans to be objectionable, allegedly exclaiming that they hated the Torah and would therefore fall into the hands of robbers. During the outbreak of hostilities, he settled in Jerusalem. During the siege of Jerusalem in the First Jewish-Roman War, he argued in favor of peace, according to the Talmud, where he found the anger of the besieged populace to be intolerable. He arranged a secret escape from the city inside a coffin, so that he could negotiate with Vespasian, who at that time was still a military commander. Yochanan correctly predicted that Vespasian would become emperor and that the temple would soon be destroyed. In return, Vespasian granted Yochanan 3 wishes: the salvation of Yavne and its sages, the descendants of Rabban Gamliel, who was of the Davidic dynasty, and a physician to treat Rabbi Tzedek, who had fasted for 40 years to stave off the destruction of Jerusalem. Curiously, this account conflates Josephus and Yochanan ben Zakkai as both negotiating with Vespasian as a mere general and predicting that he would be Caesar, although by the time of the siege he already was. Is ben Zakkai another invention of Josephus, as my research and that of Joe Atwill, author of Caesar's Messiah, indicates Jesus to be? In a paper that I'll publish here later, I trace every mention of robbers in Josephus's War of the Jews. In every case, robbers meant rebels against the Roman Empire, who would waylay the rich trying to flee with their wealth and steal their robes. This made them like any other person. Galilee was also where Josephus lived, making another parallel between the two who may be one. After deserting the siege and saving his skin and his students and the Davidic dynasty, ben Zakkai preserves the rabbinical version of Judaism that opposed the Zealots and Sadducees and sided with the Roman Empire. This version is all about genealogy and who had the rights to rule down through the Davidic dynasty. But a curious theme throughout the Torah, or Old Testament, is younger brothers that usurp the inheritance from the older son through trickery and lies. Let's start with the ultimate do-over, the flood. In The Devil and Naomi Wolf, which I'll have linked at the end, I show how Noah curses Ham and Canaan for their descendants to be slaves in perpetuity to the sons of Shem, or the Shemites or Semites, as my reference Bible says. Canaan is sometimes Ham's son and sometimes his brother in the same passage. Shem and Ham's younger brother, Japheth, are given the inheritance of the right to rule the whole earth, since everyone else has been wiped out by the flood. And the descendants of Ham and Canaan to be their slaves, because Ham told his brothers that Noah was naked. I think this is the pivotal story of the Torah. In the Talmud, one theory is that Ham castrated Noah, depriving him of a fourth son, and that's why Noah curses Ham's fourth son, Canaan. Samuel's theory is that Ham sodomized Noah, based on saw, meaning rape of women in other parts of the Torah. Recent scholars say that Ham had sex with Noah's wife, which is why Canaan is both his son and his brother. This seems a long way to get around the obvious that drunk and naked Noah raped Canaan and Ham told his brothers while they covered up for Noah. The etymology of the name Ham, as I'm told by the Oracle Google, means burnt, black, or hot. In Egyptian, HM is the same name for servant and majesty. In 1569 of the Anno Mundi, the Hebrew dating system that goes by the ages of the patriarchs back to Adam, Ham gets 1/3 of the world, with everything west of the Nile and south of Gadir. But according to Jubilee 1029, after the fall of the Tower of Babel, Canaan no longer lives in Ham's allotted lands, but squats on Shem's inheritance in Lebanon from Jordan to the sea. Everyone warns him that this is a bad idea and his curse will catch up with him. But does he listen? No, he does not. I knew that colonial slave owners used Ham as the justification for slavery, but I didn't realize that this went back to Josephus, who I see as the original editor of the anti-Canaanite polemic, especially if Ben Zakkai is the same person, and the author of the anti-zealot pro-imperial fiction called the Gospels. However, Josephus interprets Ham's descendants as populating Africa and the contingent parts of Asia. He states that Egypt is the land of Ham. So the Torah has been a Shemitic justification for slavery for 2,000 years. To segue from the biblical into the practical applications of this twisted morality, I happened to watch a 3-hour documentary that was called The 13 Sugar Colonies, and this was recommended by Julius Schoolafish on his book mentions. It is unbelievable to me that this only has had 5,000 views on the YouTube where I saw it, and I'll have the link in thirdparadigm.substack.com, and I really encourage everyone to go and watch it. The YouTube description says, "This is a story of a rather unknown history of Zionism. Before the theft and colonization of Palestine, there was the colonization of 13 sugar colonies in the Americas and Caribbean, which brought about the sugar and slave trade and the birth of globalized capitalism." So it has discussions by legit scholars and historians, both Black and Jewish professors, who have discussed the 13 sugar colonies and the impact they played on the Black Holocaust. It reads, "No matter how much they want to hide the history, there is no longer any debate. The evidence is overwhelming. The lies have been deconstructed." And then it gives a link to the video at a Dropbox and also an audio file to download. The author says, "I don't even need credit. This critical history needs to be told," and then lists the 10 scholars, including a rabbi and Louis Farrakhan and other doctorates. So this is something that is part of the public domain and should be known by the world. Going back to the Bible and the question of who is entitled to own both land and people, let's jump to the beginning of Genesis. I've never gotten a straight answer from a Torah scholar on the archaeological dating of different texts, but the Mishnah Torah wasn't completed until 1178 CE, so the story of Adam and Eve may well have been fabricated after the story of Noah. The same Canaan, indicating a descendant of Cain, seems very suspicious to me. If we look at Cain and Abel as a retroactive justification for land theft and slavery, the last son, Seth, takes the inheritance away from Cain, who stood to inherit when his brother Abel died. Did Cain kill Abel? Did Seth kill Abel? As history, it's a ridiculous question about three random people. It only makes sense within the context of the author's intent. The implication by the omniscient narrator is that Cain has killed Abel, not by his denial, but by the fishier, "Am I my brother's keeper?" That establishes his all-important guilt of fratricide. Psychologically, it's very clever. Had Cain just said no, it would not be as compelling. His evasion establishes the moral justification for the descendants of Seth to take away the land and lives of the descendants of Cain, or the Canaanites. And do I need to point out that Seth and Shem have 3 of the same 4 letters? I'll do another episode in the future giving my evidence that Abram is really Abdi Ashirta, the mercenary warlord who was poaching the towns that belonged to the Pharaoh through his vassal lords. He was represented as a jackal in the stone tablets that were sent by those vassal lords to the Pharaoh, saying, "Send archers, you need to intervene," because he is putting down these insurgencies and then claiming them as his own. This sheds an entirely different light on stories like Lot, the daughter raper, and also Sodom and Gomorrah, where the mob is saying, "Send out the spies." And instead, what Lot does is offer them his virgin daughters to gang rape. So there's a whole different history that I think we need to explore there. But what we know from the Bible is that Abram led an itinerant tribe into other people's land, complete with an army of 318 men. This would indicate that he wasn't the eldest son who was entitled to the inheritance of Seth. He lies and says that Sarah is his sister and not his wife, so the ruler will not kill him to take her because of her beauty as a concubine. Who says that chivalry is dead? She's 65 at that time. When the king finds out he's been tricked, instead of accusing Abram, he's profusely apologetic and gives him many gifts. Clearly a barbarous, godless heathen. Hagar becomes Abram's second wife, or concubine, as a gift from the barren Sarah. Hagar has Ishmael, the oldest son and therefore the heir. When Sarah has Isaac at 90, she sends Hagar and Ishmael to die in the desert, blaming it on Ishmael looking with envy at Isaac. I don't believe, by the way, that there are actually any women mentioned in the Bible. I think every time they mention a woman by name, it's actually representing a territory, and that women and slaves were not even worth putting in by any kind of name. So these are all metaphors, I think, myths of entitlement. The end result of this story is that inheritance of the right to rule goes from the firstborn, Ishmael, to the second, Isaac. The blame, like Adam and Eve, is placed on the woman, while Abram righteously tries to sacrifice Isaac to God. But God confirmed the callous and manipulative dispossession of Ishmael by staying Abram's hand. So Isaac gets the inheritance without any of the guilt going to the men. And the last example of stealing the inheritance that I'll cite here, although there's more for another time, is Isaac's sons Esau and Jacob. Esau is the oldest, but Jacob is his mother's favorite, and she connives with him to steal the blessing, which means the inheritance. Esau's name means red, and he's described as rough and hairy, while Jacob means relatively perfect man. As the story goes, Esau comes in from the fields hungry and asks for some stew. Jacob says, "I'll give it to you for your birthright." And Esau says, "Yeah, sure." Then Jacob covers his arms with goat skin so his blind father will think he's Esau. And although Isaac recognizes Jacob's voice, the hairy arms convince him and he blesses him. When Esau finds out, he expects his father to make it right. But Isaac says, "Sorry, kid, I've only got one blessing." I read a blog recently that presents Esau as stupid and greedy and trading his inheritance for a bowl of porridge. Really? We know that Jacob lies, cheats, and steals. And now you're going to believe him that this is a valid contract that was made in full knowledge. Esau's reaction to the dispossession is not to bat his belly in satisfaction. Wikipedia says that Esau was born in Canaan, modern-day Israel. Well, isn't that convenient? Israel happens to be the name that Jacob claims that God gave him after he stole Esau's inheritance. So, in this, again, the father is blameless while the mother does all the dirty work. And why does she hate Esau so much? Because Esau had 2 Canaanite wives and then married his cousin, the daughter of Ishmael. So he sullied her pure blood by mixing it with those of tinted races, rather than her relatively perfect man who has no color mentioned to his skin. And how did Esau himself get that ruddy complexion? To point out the obvious, the one called Israel doesn't just believe that he can fool his blind father with some goatskin gauntlets, but also God. The same omniscient God who supposedly knew that Abel's accident was Cain's responsibility now says no do-overs, no takesy-backsies with those blessings. Jacob fooled you fair and square, Isaac and Esau. I am the Lord thy God, and I honor cheats and liars. This is the redundant theme of the Torah. To end, I'm going to give some quotes from the Talmud. The Talmud is the rabbinical texts that are all collected, and I'm not going to pronounce the Hebrew names, but if you go to thirdparadigm.substack.com, all of the references will be there, including the verses. Murdering Goyim is like killing a wild animal. Even the best of the Gentiles should be killed. Jews may swear falsely by use of subterfuge wording. Do not save Goyim in danger of death. Show no mercy to the Goyim. If it can be proven that someone has given the money of Israelites to the Goyim, a way must be found after prudent consideration to wipe him off the face of the earth. A Jew should and must make a false oath when the Goyim ask if our books contain anything against them. The Jews are human beings, but the nations of the world are not human beings, but beasts. When the Messiah comes, every Jew will have 2,800 slaves. Jehovah created the non-Jew in human form so that the Jew would not have to be served by beasts. The non-Jew is consequently an animal in human form and condemned to serve the Jew day and night. A Gentile girl who is 3 years old can be violated. If a goy kills a goy or a Jew, he is responsible. But if a Jew kills a goy, he is not responsible. It is permitted to kill a Jewish denunciator everywhere. It is permitted to kill him even before he denounces. All property of other nations belongs to the Jewish nation, which consequently is entitled to seize upon it without any scruples. How to interpret the word robbery? A goy is forbidden to steal, rob, or take women slaves, etc., from a goy or from a Jew, but a Jew is not forbidden to do this to a goy. So there you have it. If this was my cultural heritage, and it is, I'd want to go back and do serious investigation into that fork in the road 2,000 years ago. That was a fork with 3 tines. On the left, you had the Shemites, who were fighting among themselves for who had the right to rule and who God cursed to be their slaves. Then you had, on the right, the Jesus cult, and they also were arguing about who had the Davidic dynasty that had continued in them, giving them the right to rule. And in between, you had both Judeo and Christian joined in the partnership of Sadduq the Pharisee and Judas the Zealot. Sadduq did not believe in the Torah and rejected that culture of superiority. And Judas put that into action by saying all people need to be free. In the Gospel of Thomas, the Gnostic Gospel, and Thomas means Didymus or twin to Judas, what it says is the Christ is the one who sees the Christ in others. That's also your heritage, and I think we should claim it. For more background on the origin of Satan and the curse of Canaan, here is The Devil and Naomi Wolf, and then this is Jesus is the OG psyops that looks more at the zealots. Thank you for watching.